What if Zoro fought every major villain in one piece? Not at his current level, but at the exact level he had in each arc. Same enemies, same conditions, no advantages, no plot armor. Would he actually win the fights Luffy struggled to survive? Or would he fall much earlier than we think? Because some of these matchups completely change everything. Let's start from the very beginning, East Blue, where everything seems easy. But that's not entirely true. Against someone like Alvida, Zoro wins instantly. Same for Morgan. These fights aren't even close. But then, things get interesting. Buggy. Because this is the first real problem for Zoro. Not because Buggy is stronger, but because of his devil fruit. At that point in the story, Zoro has no haki, which means he can't properly cut Buggy. And we've already seen what happens. Zoro was caught off guard and badly injured. So in this fight, Zoro actually loses, not because he's weaker, but because it's a terrible matchup. Then comes Kuro. Fast, precise, dangerous. But once you understand his movement, he becomes predictable. And Zoro has the instincts to read that. So this is a win. Now Don Krieg, a tougher fight because of his armor. But even then, Zoro has the techniques to target weak points. So after a longer fight, he still wins. And then, Arlong. This one is different, because physically, Zoro is strong enough. Even Arlong was scared of him. But there's one problem, his injuries. Zoro was still heavily wounded from Mihawk. And in that condition, he just can't win. So Arlong takes it. And just like that, Zoro's journey already looks different. But this is where things change, because Zoro is about to face his first real walls, starting with Smoker. At that point in the story, no one in the Straw Hats can touch him. He's a Logia. No haki, no counter, no chance. So this is an instant loss. And it only gets worse. Crocodile, one of the first major villains, and easily one of the hardest matchups, because even Luffy lost to him twice before figuring out a way to hit him. But Zoro, he doesn't have that option. He can't use water like Luffy. He can't adapt the same way. And in a desert, Crocodile is even stronger. So this fight is another loss. Then Luffy faced Bellamy, a pirate who believed dreams were worthless. But here's the thing. Bellamy got one-shotted, and Zoro at that point was already fighting way stronger opponents, enemies that could actually push him. So let's be honest, Bellamy isn't even a fight Zoro destroys him, instantly. But then comes Enel, and this one is even more brutal. Because Enel isn't just strong, he's untouchable, lightning speed, massive range. And again, a Logia. Zoro already fought him once, and couldn't even land a hit. So this isn't even a fight, it's a complete defeat. And just like that, Zoro hits a wall, a level where strength alone is no longer enough. Then comes a real problem. Aokiji, an admiral, one of the strongest forces in the entire world. Luffy couldn't do anything, not even close. And Zoro is strong, but not admiral level. Even if he pushes himself to the limit, Aokiji freezes him instantly. This is where things get interesting again, because Zoro doesn't just keep losing. He adapts, he evolves, and now he starts facing enemies he can actually challenge. Let's start with Enia's lobby. Blueno, a CP9 agent with a broken ability, the Door Fruit. He was strong enough to push Luffy to unlock Gear Second, but here's where it gets interesting. Zoro didn't fight Blueno, he fought Kaku, and Kaku is stronger than Blueno. Better physical strength, better sword skills, better overall combat ability, so if Zoro can defeat Kaku, Blueno is not stopping him. Rob Lucci, one of the strongest opponents Luffy ever faced at that point. Fast, brutal, almost untouchable. Luffy had to push himself to the absolute limit, just to win. And Zoro? He was strong, but not at that level yet. Even with Asura, it's hard to see him taking down Lucci. So this is another loss. But then, everything changes. Thriller Bark, Oars, a monster, a giant with insane power. But here's the difference. This fight isn't just about strength, it's about will. Zoro has one of the strongest mentalities in the entire series. He's the same man who took all of Luffy's pain and survived. So if anyone could handle something like nightmare power, it's him. Which means Zoro could actually win this fight. And after that, Moria. A completely different type of opponent. Not just strength, but strategy. The goal wasn't to overpower him directly, but to force him to lose control. And Zoro is smart enough to figure that out. So once again, he finds a way. Another win. So now, things start to shift because Zoro isn't just strong anymore. He's becoming dangerous. And then, we reach one of the most dangerous parts of the story, the Summit War Saga. Starting with Impelled Down. Magellan. This isn't just a fight, it's a death sentence. His poison is lethal. One hit, and it's over. Luffy barely survived. He had to be saved more than once. And Zoro? He has no resistance, no counter, no way to recover. So this is an absolute loss, no debate. And there's also Blackbeard. Not a full fight, but still important. Because even without his devil fruit, he was already incredibly strong. Strong enough to scar Shanks, which tells you everything. So even if Zoro faced him here, it wouldn't end well. And just like that, we reach a point where power alone is no longer enough to survive. Marineford, a battlefield filled with monsters, admirals, commanders, legends. And here's the reality. Luffy couldn't defeat anyone. Not because he was weak, but because the level was just too high. So if Luffy couldn't win there, Zoro wouldn't either. Because at that stage, they were simply not ready. This wasn't their war to win. It was a glimpse of what was coming next. After the time skip, everything changes. Because Zoro is no longer the same. He trained for 2 years with Mihawk, the strongest swordsman in the world. And now, he enters the new world. Stronger, faster, more precise. So let's see how far he goes now. First, Hody Jones. Even underwater, where Hody has the advantage, Zoro completely dominates him. No struggle, no hesitation. This is an easy win. Then Caesar Clown. A Logia, which used to be a problem, but not anymore. Zoro now has Haki, and unlike Luffy, he wouldn't underestimate him. So this fight ends quickly. Another win. But then, we reach a turning point. Doflamingo. This is where things get serious again, because Doflamingo isn't just strong, he's fast, he controls the battlefield, and he has his awakening, which means he can attack from everywhere. At that point in the story, Zoro doesn't have the mobility to keep up. Even reaching him is difficult. So even if Zoro has the raw power, this fight is extremely hard to win, and in most cases, he loses. But then comes Cracker, and this matchup is actually perfect for Zoro, because unlike Luffy, he doesn't need to eat through the army. He can cut everything from a distance. And Cracker has one major weakness. He can't handle pain. So one clean hit could end the fight. Zoro wins. But finally, we reach Katakuri. And this is where everything stops again. Future sight, insane speed, perfect control. Luffy had to evolve mid-fight just to keep up. And at that point, Zoro simply doesn't have the tools to deal with that. So this is where he falls, again. And then, we reach the highest level. The kind of enemies that define the end of the story. Yonko level. Monsters. Characters that even Luffy couldn't defeat on his own at first. So the question is simple. Could Zoro reach that level? At that point in the journey, he's already incredibly strong. His endurance is insane. His attack power is among the best. But against opponents like this, that's not enough. Because these fights aren't just about strength. They're about experience, adaptation, and pushing beyond your limits, again and again. That's what allowed Luffy to survive, to grow, to eventually win. And Zoro, he has the mindset, he has the will, but he doesn't go through the same fights, the same evolution. So realistically, this is where his journey stops. Not because he's weak, but because he hasn't reached that final stage yet. And that's what makes this so interesting. Because Zoro isn't meant to replace Luffy, he's meant to follow his own path and become the strongest in his own way. And maybe this was never really about Zoro winning. Because when you look back at everything, from East Blue to the New World, you start to see a pattern. Every time the level rises, the fights change. It's no longer just about strength, it's about adaptation, growth, surviving impossible situations, again and again and again. That's what Luffy does. He loses, he learns, he comes back stronger over and over. But Zoro's path is different. He doesn't chase the same fights, he doesn't grow the same way, and maybe he's not supposed to. Because Zoro was never meant to defeat every enemy. He was meant to stand beside the one who will. From the very beginning, his goal was clear, to become the strongest swordsman, not the Pirate King. And when you think about it, everything makes sense. The wins, the losses, the limits, they were always there, hidden in plain sight. So now the real question is, how far do you think Zoro would go? Because at the end of the story, everything changes, and that's exactly where things get crazy. Because what if I told you, we might already know how One Piece ends, and I broke it all down right here.